Among the doctrinal themes found in the many churches within NAR networks, none are as widespread as the notion of an end-time revival, just before the second coming of Christ. NAR apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers build anticipation for this coming revival and stress the urgency of this predicted event. Various key words are used in sermons and lectures to focus the listener's attention on this prediction, such as gathering of the saints or end-time harvest. Conventions are advertised with revival themes, while books and literature promote the idea that one of the smaller revivals might result in the worldwide revival that is predicted. While the idea of a worldwide revival as a prerequisite to the return of Jesus Christ is an extra-biblical concept that helps to identify a group within the NAR, the idea itself is nothing new. Worldwide revivals were also a theme used among converts to the Christian and Missionary Alliance, and many of the key figures involved with the CMA organized splinter groups with the same theme. Some of these key figures, such as Frank Sanford and F. Bosworth, played significant roles in shaping and influencing the Pentecostal movement. Others involved with the CMA, who never joined the Pentecostal movement, such as Paul Rader, were instrumental in shaping the fundamentalist and evangelical movements. Their influence contributed to a large group of Christians outside of the Pentecostal movement that could easily adopt worldwide revival themes as part of their belief system. Though very similar and built upon the same idea, the NAR version of the end-time revival doctrine is both more complex and disturbing. Leaders of the NAR combine other core doctrines with the revival concept, ranging from spiritual warfare to dominionism, to create a militant form of revival that could also be viewed much like a series of end-time battles, strategically claiming victory over the end-time war, which will allegedly result in the return of Christ to the earth. Training its members to be spiritual warriors, while also promoting the belief that Christians outside of the NAR network are weak or apostate, the NAR version of the end-time revival theology quickly turns into an ultimatum given to outsiders. An outsider will be forced to choose between the end-time revivalists or Satan himself. How did the NAR make the connection between Christian revivals and the apocalypse? Where did leaders of the NAR get the idea to use a revival as a means to separate the sheep from the goats? To find out, we must first examine events that took place during the Azusa Street Revival, which the NAR claims to be one of the key milestones in history leading to the worldwide revival. When Charles Fox Parham came into contact with the British Israel Doctrine at Frank Sanford's Holy Ghost Annas Bible School, he also encountered the notion of a worldwide revival. Though he did not participate in Sanford's mission to forcibly convert people by sailing his vessels to their shores and attempting to engage in spiritual warfare, while preaching offshore and praying towards foreign soil, Parham adopted the idea that global evangelism was vital to hastening Christ's return. Parham was not the only key figure in Pentecostalism to be influenced by Frank Sanford's unusual doctrines. Pentecostal leader and first general overseer of the Church of God, A.J. Tomlinson, was also among Sanford's converts. Tomlinson was baptized into Sanford's movement in 1897 by Sanford convert Ralph Gleason and was rebaptized by Sanford himself in October 1901. It should come as no surprise that Tomlinson played a key role in promoting the belief in a coming worldwide revival within Pentecostalism. As it relates to the NAR version of the worldwide revival, Sanford's version of the doctrine included a critical component: urgency. Sanford was a doomsday prophet who used fears of impending doom to instill a sense of urgency. He was most famous for his failed 1909 doomsday prophecy, having declared that the world would end at exactly 30 seconds after 10:20 a.m. on Wednesday, September 15, 1909. Converts to both the NAR and Sanford's version of the doctrine are led to believe that not only is a global revival necessary for the second coming of Christ, but also that it is urgent and that Christians must quickly hasten this revival through rigorous prayer and spiritual activities. Without this sense of urgency, it is unlikely that the Azusa Street Revival would have been viewed as the epicenter of modern Pentecostalism. The very unusual events that happened leading up to and during the Azusa Street revival might have otherwise caused a healthy level of skepticism towards the event. NAR historians sympathetic to Pentecostalism consider the Azusa Street revival to be a holy event inspired by God, wherein an outpouring of the Holy Spirit occurred for several months. These historians present a largely one-sided view of the event, basing their assessment upon the accounts given by Pentecostals who were either present at the revival or in close contact with someone who was. As such, those accounts are also sympathetic to the event, omitting any of the details that do not support their narrative. According to those historians, the gift of speaking in tongues transferred to believers was the main attraction. Though that version of the story is partially true, and what the newspapers called a quote, weird babble of tongues, there was a mixture of converts and so-called unbelievers, curious to see the commotion. Contrary to the picture painted by NAR historians, new conversions to the Pentecostal faith were not the objective. The curious people who attended were denounced as so-called unbelievers, and William Seymour heaped anathemas upon their souls, less than 2 weeks into the revival. When the Los Angeles Times published an article on April 18, 1906, and the public was suddenly made aware of the most unusual scene taking place, the tensions were dramatically amplified. What began as a small revival, meant only for those sympathetic to Seymour's interpretation of Parham's and Sanford's theology, quickly became a religious circus, where the potential Parhamites were the main attraction. It was estimated that among participants in the revival, only 1 in 10 people were converts to the religion. The rest were there for the thrills, with free admission. Glossolalia was the main attraction of the revival, but not for the reasons one might conclude from later accounts of the event. Preaching from the Bible was negligible for multiple reasons. Before the pandemonium ensued, Seymour had come to teach Parham's theory concerning speaking in tongues. When news began to spread, and the so-called unbelievers began to examine the process, it was discovered that Seymour read from the Bible in intervals of only 1 or 2 words between episodes of religious frenzy. Others, who were illiterate, claimed to be given the power by God to read the Bible, but were unable to display this new power. This was far from the only unusual attraction bringing in large numbers of people. NAR historians have failed to mention the holy kick that accompanied the glossolalia. This omission is likely due to the fact that city officials were called to the scene when the holy kickers turned dangerous. Only a few weeks into the revival, during the religious frenzy, revivalists became so worked up that moments of insanity plagued the movement. Some participants began to bark like dogs, while others stomped on the floor. Several women began lying on the floor and kicking their heels in the air, leaving parts of their bodies exposed during the services, so much so that newspapers noted the exhibitionists exposed more than the strip clubs were allowed. Like the strip clubs, some of the kickers ran outside to bring back male companions, throwing their arms around their necks. Witnesses described one man narrowly escaping the insanity. Some of the women openly confessed having left their husband and children in order to enjoy more power. Men and women openly embraced in ways unbecoming of a Christian of the era, which apparently caused several curious young girls to enter the revival unattended. Between the reading of 1 or 2 words from the Bible, the kicking and stomping, and the unintelligible words, prophets began to utter words from the Lord in the form of failed prophecies, and the predictions given in English were recorded. Some men stood claiming to prophesy but uttered words that were not in any known language and therefore useless to the group. It was predicted that railroads would bend and would no longer be usable. It was also predicted that steel girders would fall, causing large buildings in Los Angeles to crumble. One prophecy declared that automobiles would suddenly stop after their power disappeared. Complete destruction of large cities, such as Chicago, Los Angeles, and Pasadena, was declared. Police were frequently called to the revival, and not simply for the revivalists disturbing the peace. Some of the new converts used indecent language at police officers before being arrested and booked for insanity. One man was stabbed in an arranged duel outside the Azusa Street mission. The man refused to give any details concerning his opponent or the reason for the duel, other than to state that it was an affair of honor, and that he was stabbed by one of several men in front of the church. Considering the fact that several of the women in the mission left their husbands, significant questions are raised about the duel. It became clear from the police reports that conversions to Christ were not part of the Azusa Street Revival's agenda. Not only were the unbelievers at the meeting cursed by the leaders of the revival, but some were physically assaulted. Such was the case of 62-year-old E.P. Harlan. Apparently, towards the end of the revival, the ministers in the Azusa Street Church openly declared that they did not allow sinners participating. Harlan rose to confess his sins, asking for instruction, and several men of the congregation grabbed him and ejected him from the building. The old man was badly bruised and taken to a hospital. It was also clear from the police reports that the spirit channeled by the revivalists was not one of peace. When police were called to halt the noisy revivalists at all hours of the night, the revivalists seldom complied and were sometimes arrested for disturbing the peace. Rather than apologize to the police or the neighbors trying to sleep, converts cursed the police force. Some even went so far as to pray to God that eternal fire would plague the heads of police, while proceeding to cause similar disturbances in the jail. Police surgeons were called to examine those arrested and found at least one to be suffering from emotional insanity and feared that she may commit some act of violence at any time, believing that she was destroying sin. Regardless of its unusual and dubious history, the Azusa Street Revival changed the course of Christianity in ways that could never have been predicted by any of the prophets who spoke at that revival. Azusa Street set the precedent for future revivals in modern Pentecostalism and the groups that Pentecostals influenced, leading to new revivals and new religious movements originating from those revivals. Though the early leaders of modern Pentecostalism believed it to be a revival that would ignite a worldwide revival, before the sudden destruction of major cities in the United States, leading to the end of days, the first wave of Pentecostalism faded away, and converts believed each new revival to be the new catalyst for the end-time revival. As it relates to the spread of Christian identity in the United States, the Azusa Street Revival and the resulting modern Pentecostal movement were critical components. Thanks to the influence of Parham and others, many Pentecostals adopted the British Israel theology and aided in the transition from British Israelism to Christian identity. Due to the Azusa Street Revival, Los Angeles became a major hub of Pentecostalism, and Parham held sermons and lectures on British Israel themes. It is also believed that Parham was using his Pentecostal influence to spread the works of Christian identity leader Gerald Burton Winrod, as Parham praised the Klan in the 1920s and was a contributor to Winrod's newsletter. How were Parham and others able to spread Christian identity throughout churches in the United States and abroad using Pentecostalism as the means of transmission? Why did so many people, including Christians outside of the Pentecostal movement, adopt the themes of Christian identity when they came into contact with them? How did these themes make their way into the NAR? To find out, we must examine the NAR from the perspective of its classification as a social movement and its relationship to the social gospel.